The supreme, profound, and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Now we will continue our discussion of the Udāna Sūtra, briefly exploring its contents. The Udāna Sūtra consists of 4 volumes and 33 chapters in total. Previously, we have covered so far the first chapter, the chapter on impermanence, which we have completed. Today we will begin the second chapter, the chapter on craving. This chapter too is extremely important, especially for many people around the world today. Perhaps due to the influence of various media and different ideological guidance for people all over the world, it seems that the meaning of existence is love. If there were no desire and attachment, it would seem that living in this world would not really have much meaning at all, truly. Of course, within this love, there is also the love of parents, the love of children, the love of relatives, all kinds of love. But among these types of love, the one that is especially hard to let go of is romantic love between men and women. That is why there are countless people who have committed suicide for love. Of course, on one hand, every sentient being possesses greed, anger, and ignorance. Within greed, there is this kind of attachment to love. This has existed since ancient times, but perhaps nowadays people's attachment to love is even stronger, more rampant, and extremely serious. Therefore, it is especially necessary for us to study such scriptures and then cut off the attachment to desire within our own minds. Even if we cannot completely eliminate it, we should at least reduce our own greed and desire. This may bring great benefit to both this life and future lives. So, just like the previous chapter on impermanence, I hope that all of you will also take this very seriously and study it diligently. If you study it, it should bring great benefit to your own mind stream, because the verses of this scripture are also especially profound and extraordinary. The commentary by the master Jikai, who explained it, is also extremely exceptional. Without this commentary, I'm afraid that many of the verses would actually be impossible for us to fully explain. So, among the various scriptures, he must have selected different stories and various teachings to provide explanations. I also see that the Dharma teachers present here, some have paper copies, some are using computers, all are reading and studying. This is very important. Otherwise, if we depend solely on our ordinary discriminating thoughts to truly interpret the deep and profound meanings of the Buddha's teachings, it would not be so easy. Today, we are discussing the second chapter, the chapter on craving. Desire comes from deluded thoughts. Know desire's root. Without deluded thoughts, desire won't arise. Earlier, we discussed impermanence. The chapter on impermanence and this chapter are, in fact, actually closely interconnected. There is a certain order to them. Why do I say this? Because earlier we talked about the world of sentient beings and the environment. All things and phenomena are impermanent. Impermanence means there is nothing solid or truly existent. In this situation, the so-called desires and attachments in our worldly life are no exception. Their very nature is also unreliable. If we develop a sense of renunciation toward samsara and toward all phenomena, it becomes easier to let go of desire. Once we are free from desire, whether it is the coarse desires of the desire realm, there are also subtle forms of attachment in the form and formless realms. All of these can gradually be eliminated. Therefore, the Buddha taught this scripture, meaning that what we refer to as this type of love, when we speak of love in today's world, whether among Westerners or Easterners. In fact, everyone often talks about it. But this so-called love, in reality, its arising is not very reasonable or logical. It is actually a mistaken concept. It arises from improper attention and deluded discrimination. As for deluded thoughts, if you have studied the Vimalakirti Sutra or the Lotus Sutra, you should certainly be well aware that deluded thoughts are not real. They are self-created illusions. Mistaking what is impure for pure and what is impermanent for permanent, these are all inverted ways of thinking. Attachment is also an inverted way of thinking. The object of your attachment is not worthy of your love, but you keep thinking that it is very attractive and that if you could obtain it, you would be so happy. Therefore, you should first understand the root of attachment. The root of attachment is not something that truly exists. It is conjured out of nothing, arising from discriminative and deluded thoughts. If you do not give rise to such delusions, you do not contemplate that way, since it is an inverted and unwholesome way of thinking indeed. If you do not give rise to deluded thoughts at all, then your attachment will not arise naturally. So, regarding this important section here, everyone should reflect deeply on it, especially younger people. In today's modern world, whether it's television or the internet, they have caused, in the mental continuum of many people, the belief that attachment is something real and existent. There are often these kinds of wrong discriminative thoughts, but these wrong discriminative thoughts, when analyzed using the Buddha's profound teachings, are indeed untenable. In the past, the Buddha took Ananda with him. It seems it was to Shravasti or somewhere similar. When they went there, at that particular time, there was a woman who was fetching water. She was probably carrying, it's said to be a water jar, but it should have been a bucket. This is because in India, when many women go to fetch water, they typically use a bucket to carry it back to their homes. They place both hands on their heads. There are those who do this. And just like in Tibet, there are also those who carry it on their backs. She took her water jar to fetch water, and while fetching water, she might have also brought her own child with her. Then she saw a handsome man by the riverside and developed a strong sense of desire for him. She continued staring at him for a moment. At the same time, she was by the well fetching water, and she thought she was throwing the bucket into the well herself. But if she wasn't careful, the rope eventually became looped around her young child's neck, and she threw him into the deep, dark well. After a while, perhaps because she was in a state of improper attention at the time, her mind might not have been clear at all. At this point, after a while, it seemed that the child had died in the well. When she pulled him out, the child was already dead. She was extremely heartbroken. Later it happened naturally, and she might have confessed this herself. After the Buddha learned about it, he also said, actually, this verse had also been spoken by previous Buddhas. And this verse was also recited by Ananda, who carefully memorized it. Then, in the evening, the Buddha would explain this principle to the monastic community as well. Therefore, the meaning expressed here is that, in fact, much of the love that exists in our world actually arises from improper attention or deluded thoughts. Because of this, people end up doing many terrible things. Normally, it would truly be impossible to tie a rope around one's own child's neck and throw them into a well. But driven by love, one can become completely irrational, no longer in a normal state of mind. For those who do not have such attachments, especially those who are particularly obsessed with romantic love, they may appear as if they've gone insane. But to themselves it all feels very real. In my hometown, last year, or maybe the year before, or probably the year before, there was a woman who had 3 children, and she also had a husband. Later, she fell in love with another man, either her brother-in-law or her sister's husband. She left her 3 children at home, and then ran off with that other man, perhaps. Of course, maybe people tried to stop them from doing this. In the end, after much suffering, she committed suicide by hanging herself from a tree. Later I heard that she had killed herself. Her husband was extremely heartbroken. He hurriedly ran while sobbing, heading to where her body was. But on the way he found out that she had already died together with that other man. In other words, if the other man had also died with her, he felt very awkward on the way and just turned back. That summer, I saw the 3 young children who had been abandoned by their mother. They looked so pitiful. Sometimes when I think about it, all sentient beings are truly pitiful. Nowadays, whether it's in novels, for example, or in movies, it's often said that people risk everything and sacrifice it all for love, that they're willing to abandon everything else completely but still can't let go of these emotions and so on. Actually, this kind of thinking is truly an upside-down view. If a person has little wisdom and is deeply attached to desire, this is something we have talked about. It's in the Lotus Sutra. If a person has little wisdom and is deeply attached to desire, for this reason the truth of suffering is taught. This is what is said in the Lotus Sutra. For this reason the truth of suffering is taught as a fundamental principle. It means that people who are especially attached to love, whose wisdom is very shallow, whether it's so-called deep love or a profound attachment to love, from a Buddhist perspective, such people, when you look at such people, their wisdom is very shallow. Why is that? Because if you observe with wisdom, whether it's your own mind that is capable of loving, or the object of your love, there's really nothing worth being attached to in these aspects. But sentient beings are very ignorant, so there's nothing they can do. Even though there's nothing truly worth loving, they will still love. Because of this, when the Buddha turned the Dharma wheel for the first time, he taught the truth of suffering, whose root is the truth of origin, which is also a kind of discriminative delusion. Delusion is the very root of our samsara. Everyone should be clear about this aspect as well. So this verse mainly talks about how people keep saying love, 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 but in fact this is delusion or inverted thinking. This is an improper mental engagement. Back on February 22nd, 2022 at 10 p.m., everyone was saying love, 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 saying it was a very auspicious day. At that time I also posted something on Weibo. Then I made a prayer wheel with lots and lots of number 2s on it. Nowadays, people are also very attached to this particular symbol. Symbolically, when they see the number 2 anywhere, like 2, 520 and so on, for instance, these are actually just discriminative thoughts. Then people start to fabricate their own illusory false constructs. After these constructs are made, gradually, even though it's just a fabrication, in their minds, it also becomes something real and tangible. So whether it's celebrating a special holiday, or in daily life, or even in spiritual practice, if you treat it as something truly existent, then people without wisdom will indeed end up being tempted by it. In the end, it may bring them endless suffering and distress. Therefore, for someone who truly studies, contemplates, and diligently practices these very crucial and fundamental principles, must be deeply contemplated. This is really very important. From emotional attachment arises sorrow, and from attachment arises fear. If one is free from attachment and desire, there is neither sorrow nor fear. This verse, which also very frequently appears in different scriptures, is very well known. The meaning is that in this world, we truly have both great love and small love. Small love refers to attachment to the opposite sex. This is called small love, because this kind of small love is truly conditional and purposeful. It is not infinite love, nor is it unconditional love, but true, genuine great love is just as described in Mahayana Buddhism. It is a love that excludes no sentient being, a love for all sentient beings. But here, the Buddha is also, in fact, actually talking about small love. In the worldly sense, so-called love refers to this kind of personal romantic love. So, is this kind of love really so wonderful after all? Nowadays, all kinds of media platforms are actively promoting it, emphasizing the genuine happiness, the sweetness, the beauty, and the bliss it brings, and so on. They use it as a beautiful symbol to embellish things. But in reality, when you truly have this kind of love, it brings about distress because of painful separation in body and mind, and often leads to great trouble. And when you have this kind of love, it gives rise to all kinds of fears and serious anxieties, because love itself by nature is illusory and completely baseless. But if you become attached to it, it brings all sorts of worries and suffering. Just look at many people nowadays, including some lay people. If you look at them because of love, they start to doubt the other person and become increasingly anxious, and gradually develop all kinds of discriminating thoughts. At the same time, they are also afraid of losing what they have, or fear that they won't receive it in the future, or feel threatened, and so on. All sorts of fears arise. If one lets go of such desires for love, then in this world they will have neither sorrow nor fear. The current sorrows and future fears will no longer exist. Because being free from attachment to love, of course, is not that simple. Our habitual tendencies from beginningless time have always been deeply rooted in our own mental continuum. So how can we let go of them? On one hand, it is by relying on spiritual teachers and listening to various teachings. This is very important. And the second aspect is to use one's own wisdom and intelligence to carefully and attentively observe. The third aspect is to diligently practice the teachings one has received, to repeatedly practice them. This is also explained in our commentaries. These three are very important. Otherwise, I think it's not so easy to be free from desire. It's not like in the time of the Buddha, where we hear one sentence and our desire disappears or our anger vanishes. It's not like that. But the great masters of the past did say this. If previously one's anger was very severe, just like Ben Gungyal, no matter how one was before, later on there was no longer such anger. If previously one's attachment was very strong, like Nanda, then later through the Buddha's teachings it could be completely uprooted, or at least significantly reduced. This does happen. So, if we can be free from such attachment, then life in this world becomes very joyful, because from attachment comes sorrow, and from attachment comes fear. If one is free from attachment, there is neither sorrow nor fear. This seems to be from, what's it called? It's also specifically mentioned in the Sutra of the Causes and Conditions of King Miao Se. And in the Sutra of 42 chapters, which we discussed before, the wording in the translation is slightly different in some places. There are also many versions in the Dhammapada and in many other scriptures as well. All of them recite this verse. This particular verse is indeed very profound and deeply meaningful. We can also clearly see in this world that suffering arises because of our attachment. Fear also arises because of attachment. If one is free from such desires, completely severed, like an arhat, even if some have not completely severed them, but have taken the pure monastic vows, because when one becomes a monastic, except for a very few with extremely heavy karma, essentially the majority of practitioner, they are free from such entanglements and bondage. In this way, one can truly live a very pure, unburdened, and completely free life. So, it is understandable that many lay people at first tend to think that the monastic path is probably a very lonely and completely isolated one, perhaps even a truly miserable path. That's what they believe. But later on, eventually they see that if someone had not become a monastic, perhaps at some point in their life, they would experience various kinds of suffering and happiness, and all sorts of afflictions might arise. But because the Buddha's path is extremely pure, indeed, this profound path of purity and clarity, this liberating path of cessation, if one truly attains it, there is no suffering of that kind. Back in 2006, some of us who had studied at the Teachers' College together after being apart for 20 years, we had graduated in 1986, and I had come here a year earlier than the others. 20 years later, we gathered in one place. At that time, among us monastics, there was a Khenpo from Huoshi and the two of us. When everyone shared experiences, it seemed the two of us were doing fine. They worried about us, thinking that when we left school, we might starve to death or freeze to death, or perhaps encounter some very unfortunate situations. But later, the two of us joked that if we had stayed as lay people, maybe we would have cried many times by now. Because seeing those around us who were in the same situation, indeed, if we truly had wisdom, perhaps in this world today, monastics generally seem to have nothing much to worry about in terms of daily life. And there isn't really all that much to be concerned about in many other aspects either. If we can truly devote ourselves to study, contemplation, and practice, life is truly very carefree. So, as we just mentioned, in this world of ours, if we can truly let go of such deep-rooted greed and intense desire, then of course that is the greatest happiness. If not, ordinary people are often deluded, intoxicated by love and desire. This was said by Chan Master Ziba, wasn't it? Ordinary people are deluded, so they become completely intoxicated by love. As we have studied together before in previous sessions, the Vimalakirti Sutra also mentions this, doesn't it? From ignorance comes attachment, and thus my illness arises. This means that because I have this ignorance, my continuum, my body and mind, are constantly and repeatedly plagued by various different illnesses. Of course, these illnesses are mainly illnesses of the mind. Especially for those who are heavily burdened by greed and desire, they are always trying to protect their own attachments. And in this process, all kinds of desires, such as wishes and hopes, arise. Nowadays, many scholars believe that what we call love, including romantic love between men and women, has a sense of novelty at the beginning. But after a few months, as the secretion of dopamine progressively and continually decreases over time, there's not much feeling left. So now there's a common saying in society that many young people, before they get married, often enthusiastically post on their Weibo or Moments, frequently sharing delightful details about their partner's love, their partner's happiness, and truly beautiful photos taken together. All these wonderful things are often shown off within their social circles. But once they actually start a family, it all completely disappears. Basically, these things vanish. Why is that? It's because that the sense of novelty they once possessed, or even their sense of happiness, for some people it completely disappears. For others, even if it doesn't disappear, they realize that this true nature isn't actually that lovable or joyful. So many ordinary people in this world, in their everyday lives, don't understand its true nature, because they don't understand its true nature. Just as I mentioned earlier, relying on these deluded and discriminating thoughts, they constantly give rise in their minds to all kinds of profound suffering. This inevitably brings about suffering in both this present life and the next existence. Therefore, according to the teachings of the Buddha, it is very important to try to cut off attachment in this regard as much as possible. This is very important. Many great masters of the past have often said, for example, if one's precepts are pure, if one's practice is carried out from beginning to end, one should frequently pray to the Guru and the three jewels. If you pray to the Guru and the three jewels, there is an invisible power at work. Relying on this invisible power, one's own practice can reach its ultimate fruition. This is also a method, because as human beings, sometimes our own abilities are very limited indeed. When truly accomplishing certain things, we may need to rely on the power of the deities. For example, this is also the case in our institute. It was the same when His Holiness was alive. When adverse conditions arose to dispel obstacles individually or collectively, or when one needed to accomplish certain endeavors, we made offerings to the Dharma protectors and prayed to the Guru and the three jewels. It may seem we cannot see them help us, but in reality, when people do things, there is a saying, people act, but the heavens are watching. So sometimes we need the invisible power of the deities. This invisible power, under certain conditions, seems to transcend our own abilities. Therefore, this is also extremely important. In fact, sentient beings are truly pitiable, especially nowadays because of the internet and the widespread dissemination of all sorts of distorted and often misleading information. which is particularly rampant and prevalent for this very reason. Many people's minds are not normal. One of our Khenpos often says, "This person has a problem with their mind, it's not normal. That person has psychological issues, not normal." But if we talk about what is truly abnormal, in reality, our own mental continuum is controlled by attachment and clinging. That is the greatest kind of madness. When a person gives rise to intense anger, that is also a very severe form of madness. And when one develops extreme greed, it is the same. By comparison, ignorance is not as readily or immediately obvious. This relates to what was mentioned earlier about desire. Oh, wait, I haven't read the Chinese text yet. Sorrow often arises from joy, and similarly, fear can also arise from joy. If one is free from attachment and delight, there is neither sorrow nor fear. Here, the difference between attachment and joy, these two distinct concepts. Here, for example, in our worldly life, I truly love someone, I genuinely like someone. It seems that in our Tibetan language, the feeling is basically the same. Whether I like someone or I love someone, or I love cars, I like cars, these concepts are essentially the same. But in the ideas that are now widespread, there are also differences. I have also asked some Westerners before, what is the difference between love and like? They said that love is a much deeper emotion, while like is generally considered to be more superficial. For example, if I simply like someone, it's acceptable whether they like me back or not. But if I truly love someone, then I find myself unable to easily back out from that significant commitment. It has to stay at that level forever, otherwise it wouldn't be reasonable. Some people have this kind of view. Maybe in Han Chinese education and cultural concepts, at least in modern times, it's like this. There is a certain difference between the two. But as for people in ancient times, it seems there wasn't much of a noticeable difference either. So here it says, because the like we often talk about and frequently discuss, liking is actually an extremely intense form of attachment and desire, a corresponding state of mind. So liking also leads to distress. Just now we said that loving someone also brings about distress. And then when it comes to liking, it really does cause all kinds of troubles as well. If you like something, wasn't it said about Patrul Rinpoche that he was especially fond of his wooden bowl? In the end, even this brought the Venerable Master some certain problems. The same principle applies. Some of us are fond of our prayer beads. Some people like their phones. Some individuals find great pleasure in their cars or houses, and others derive joy from their connections with people and so forth. Just as the revered Saraha wisely stated, any tiny bit of attachment you have will bring endless suffering. So in actual fact, liking also gives rise to a certain amount of distress. If you like something, it also brings about all kinds of fears and anxieties. There is no sense of security. Nowadays, if you like something, you always feel insecure and afraid of losing it. For example, if I have a really nice car, or if I have something truly valuable and precious, then I constantly worry it might be stolen by cunning thieves, or violently robbed by ruthless bandits, or tragically lost due to various unforeseen natural disasters, and so on. I might completely lose it. But if you truly manage to let go of such attachments and emotional dependencies, then worries and fears simply cease to exist and vanish from your mind. So whether it's love or fondness, these are also just illusions and delusions created by our discriminating thoughts. Next, sometimes if we don't have a case study, I might not mention it again if there's no case study, not necessarily. If it's not discussed, at least in our commentary, I haven't seen it. But if you happen to find it yourselves, you can certainly add it in as well. However, this particular case study was actually something the Buddha himself shared in a certain specific place during his interactions with some people, and perhaps at the time, he was inspired to recite some verses, or perhaps spoken due to certain conditions arising. So regarding case studies, on one hand, everyone should also talk about them. But when discussing a case study, the main point is to combine it with the verses. I've noticed that during some oral exams, people mention the case study, the connection between the case study and this topic. This is very important. Why did the Buddha recite this verse at that time? At first glance, some specific case studies appear to have very little to do with our particular verses. But in fact, there should be a connection. if there truly isn't such a case, then the Buddha certainly wouldn't have told such a significant case at that time.
Dogi nam man dungar de tambo ngarlam jeva tsa jume lagna lagne mawar vara jikta shipa chapshit jin.
The fruit of desire is suffering, sweet at first, but later it burns. Like holding on to fire and refusing to let go, the foolish end up burning themselves. Here, it means that when it comes to desire, in reality, its outcome is not truly joyful. If you genuinely love all sentient beings, that probably isn't termed worldly desire. It should be profoundly called boundless great love, which is indeed oriented towards all sentient beings. But this kind of love, as previously articulated, is very much like the Buddha, whether toward pitiful people or toward those who are very fortunate, and especially feeling more compassion for those who are pitiful, as was also mentioned in His Holiness's teachings yesterday, right? So this is truly genuine love. True love has no conditions, no demands, and no specific goals. As long as it benefits sentient beings, it is always supportive and always willing to provide assistance. But the kind of small love we have in this world is not truly like this. At the very beginning, it might feel sweet, wonderfully warm, and joyful. For instance, consider the moment you first acquire something significant, such as a brand new automobile in terms of accumulating wealth, or perhaps some other newly obtained, more luxurious possessions. At first it brings you happiness. But later on, it also seems to become a significant cause of suffering for many. One tea leaf has one tea leaf's suffering. One horse has one horse's suffering, just as it is said. This kind of love at the very first beginning, when you first receive it, it really does seem wonderful. Just like some young people in the world today. At first, they seem inseparable and close-knit, feeling extremely happy and joyful, as if they've obtained a wish-fulfilling jewel, or attained the ultimate fruit of nirvana, so especially happy and content. But who truly knows after how many years or even months will this feeling last? Gradually, little by little, many of these things, the beautiful flowers in front of you, do not always bloom, and good times do not always last. These beautiful flowers will not always bloom. And then the ultimate result of this is extremely, truly, very intense. Very hard to endure, and it can burn. So this is just like some of us foolish ordinary people holding a torch or a burning stick in our hands, and if we stubbornly refuse to let go, then surely our own physical bodies will be completely burned. Some ancient texts say it's like a very young child, if a small child doesn't truly understand and holds a burning torch in their hand, but no matter how much it truly burns, they still will not let go. So we ordinary people in this world are just like this, because desire in its various forms brings all kinds of suffering and hardship, and we ourselves know it, clearly aware that this is a painful thing, but because of our own ignorance, we are always unwilling to let go. We might even be willing to sacrifice our very own lives for the sake of it. So nowadays in this world, whether it's the elderly or the young, logically speaking, when we are very young, our attachment and our greed are much stronger indeed. And when we are old, it should be a bit better. But nowadays, if people are extremely ignorant, it seems that as they get older, this kind of attachment only grows stronger. In this case, even though we clearly know we are taking many wrong turns, especially for practitioners, for monastics, if we harbor deeply impure desires in this particular regard, then our spiritual practice simply cannot be accomplished or brought to fruition at all. It may even be that the mind, because it is caught up in a state of distraction and confusion at such a time, for your mind to wholeheartedly focus deeply on a particular field of study is simply impossible. Because the mind has already been intoxicated and distorted by afflictions, how could there be any normal state of mind to deeply study the profound teachings? That, in essence, is impossible to achieve. So, in this context, it also explicitly mentions King Vidudaba. King Vidudaba, at that time, killed many members of the Shakya clan. 7 days later, together with his followers and relatives, he embarked on his journey. He truly enjoyed this happiness by the riverside. But later, this particular period of profound happiness for him was rather short-lived. The intense fires of hell burned him deeply, causing immense suffering. After the Buddha himself witnessed this profound scene, he also recited this verse. There is also this kind of saying, because this King Vidudaba, as everyone knows, there was resentment between King Vidudaba and the Shakya clan. There is the story involving the fisherman, which can also be explained in this way. But in this present life, his karmic connections, as I mentioned earlier, King Vidudaba was originally a prince from another country. At that particular time, the Shakya clan was willing to accept his proposal to marry one of their princesses as his consort. But at that time, the people of the Shakya clan seemed to look down on him. King Vidudabha's father was the ruler of a small country, so they chose a rather attractive maidservant at the time and pretended, saying she was their true princess, and then married her off to him. This princess eventually gave birth to a child. She gave birth to a prince who was King Vidudaba. When King Vidudaba was young, his mother told him, "We are from the Shakya clan, a noble and ancient lineage." Later, when King Vidudaba was still a young child, he really wanted to visit his homeland, the place where his mother was from. Then, once, he came to the Shakya clan's territory. At that particular time, no one truly treated him with any significant respect whatsoever. Moreover, it seemed that wherever he and his mother sat, the people of the Shakya clan would later clean those places. Because she was a maidservant, and as a maidservant, according to the traditional Indian caste system, they looked down on her very much. At this point, King Vidudaba asked, why is it like this? At that moment, he discovered that his own mother was not a princess from the royal palace, but just a maidservant, and that the Shakya clan had deceived him. Moreover, he himself was also greatly humiliated there. Therefore, he felt very deeply unhappy in his heart indeed. From then on, he made a malicious vow, saying that when he grew up, he would definitely wipe out the Shakya clan. "Why did you deceive my mother, and deceive me as well?" Because of this significant reason, later on King Vidudaba and the entire Shakya clan, just as we discussed yesterday, the resentment between them, of course, the resentment from past lives, is just as we often talk about in some spiritual teachings. But the resentment in this lifetime was due to some of his familial ties, the same clan, the same ethnicity. Actually, when it comes to the same ethnicity, the resentment can be very serious, because there is a deeply intertwined and shared karma between them. Once this collective karma fully matures and reaches its peak, it is highly prone to suddenly erupt. Moreover, it inevitably erupts on a broader group level. Actually, back then, between the King Vidudaba and the ancient kingdom of Kapilavastu, the ongoing war between the two of them often reminds me, nowadays, if you look at North Korea and South Korea, they are also of the same ethnicity. There must be a very deep karma among people of the same ethnicity. And then the nations of Israel and Palestine. Whether it's actually these two countries, one of them still doesn't have an established identity, but the ongoing conflicts and tragic killings between them, the concept of mutual assured destruction. These individuals share a common ethnic background, indicating a shared heritage and cultural identity that connects them deeply. It's the same with Russia and Ukraine. So, in many cases where there is shared karma, back then they collectively created negative karma as a group, and now there is this kind of mutual hatred that exists among them. Maybe even now in big cities, many people, as a collective group for example, if we were all dedicated fishermen, and we, as these fishermen, in a large and unified gathering to the riverbank to fish, then in the next life, these people might all become citizens of this country or that country. So the web of karma is truly inconceivable. It covers everything. That's precisely why we can also clearly observe many profoundly bitter and far-reaching consequences across the entire world. At first, their relationships might have been very good. The relationships between people were also exceptionally good. They even shared common ideals and worked together harmoniously. But later on, over time, they ended up becoming enemies to each other. The cycle of revenge never ends. It turns out like this. So first there is this very sweet love, and then comes the bitter result. So in this world, many people first have a rather good connection or affinity, and at that particular time it truly seems like life is very happy and fulfilling. In the Buddhist scriptures it is also said, if you create karma while laughing, you will most certainly later reap the painful and sorrowful results in bitter tears, including the Sutra of 100 Karmas or something like that. When we sometimes cite scriptural evidence, you all still need to be a bit more cautious and careful in your overall approach. Whether it's scriptural or logical reasoning, because in the Buddhist scriptures and when it comes to oral Dharma examination and debates, it's best to be very rigorous. You can't just say whatever comes to mind. It's best to know the source of what you're quoting, because nowadays many things could possibly, so we need to be even more careful. Otherwise, if you get used to being vague like this, it might not be very good either. In academia, including oral Dharma examinations, rigor is very important. Originally, composing treatises is an extremely rigorous process. But when it comes to lectures, speaking, and debates, these are not always so rigorous. But in a certain sense, lectures, debates, and commentaries are the entryway for the wise. So we still need to be diligent.
Nourish nacha vatan vamola yongs cheksem kanyin latu na chak xiang zema lifshi changma gang de tak tambur menxin pakbay song.
Some texts have so many words, so when translated into Chinese, sometimes there are slight differences, and the number of words is not the same. Some of them, as I see here, if one is truly attached in their heart to beautiful jeweled earrings, or to their beloved children, it is like iron or wood bound with grass. The sages say this is not strong. This is also a kind of deeply metaphorical way of speaking that we encounter here. If one is strongly attached to beautiful ornaments made of gold, silver, or precious jewels, and also to one's own beloved children, the commentary says that daughter here can refer to one's own daughter or to one's wife. As for jeweled earrings, it means earrings made of precious gems. Whether it's your earrings or your necklace, your ear ornaments or your rings, all kinds of worldly and material ornaments, sometimes when we truly see these, especially the ornaments of us Tibetans, they are actually quite interesting. When we haven't studied them, they seem rather large and quite heavy, but after carefully studying them and observing their intricate details, we find that they all have very profound meanings. For example, precious gold, shimmering silver, vibrant coral, beautiful agate, and striking turquoise. Each of these, the ancients, have spoken of its function, its merits, and its tangible benefits, including its color and the specific material from which it is crafted. There are special stories and meanings embedded within every single aspect. If you don't give it much thought when we look at them, because nowadays everyone knows, we are all profoundly influenced by Western culture, and virtually everyone wears the same conventional Western suit, with no ornaments at all. At most, perhaps a truly exquisite diamond ring. And nothing else besides that. It seems like this culture is very monotonous. So in our world, even in very ancient times, and even now in places like India and Nepal, they place great importance on various types of jewelry and necklaces, including earrings and nose rings. Whether it's these precious treasures made of valuable stones, or one's own beloved children, cherished wife, and so on, if you become deeply attached to these, then this attachment can indeed be quite serious and profound. What exactly does this mean? Compared to this strong and binding kind of attachment, if you find yourself bound by heavy iron chains, or restrictive wooden locks, or even cumbersome shackles made of wood, in the past there were ones made of iron and ones made of wood, and even bindings made of grass ropes or regular ropes, the sages, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Arhats. They often say in various sutras and treatises that these are not considered to be truly solid restraints. What is truly the most solid and enduring restraint then? The strongest is attachment. Attachment is a very solid restraint. We ordinary people tend to think that if our hands and feet are all shackled with heavy iron or sturdy wooden cuffs or tightly tied up with strong ropes, we truly feel like, wow, I have absolutely no way to get out of this prison. I can't be free, how pitiful I am. But in reality, these don't really count. If you are attached to your ornaments, if you are attached to your children or to your loved ones, then these mental and emotional shackles are truly even more serious than the physical ones. So regarding this, back then King Mengguang, he ruled over many people at that time. And when he ruled the world, he imposed different punishments on different people. Some were restrained with heavy iron shackles and thick iron chains. Some were bound with sturdy wooden shackles and strong wooden locks. And some were tightly tied up with rough ropes. At that time, many monks in the city of Shravasti heard about this, and they all felt it was really terrifying. In fact, King Mengguang is mentioned in some of the Buddha's sutras. He was a great Dharma king and was also very good to the Buddha. But sometimes, after all, he was a king. If someone disobeyed, he would definitely start punishing them. And when he punished them, it seems that even in India nowadays, there are similar situations. If someone does even a little bit wrong, the police immediately start tying them up, really beating them. It's especially cruel. When he was doing these things back then, the monks told the Buddha about it. Then the Buddha began to recite this verse. There was another case, it seems, involving a monk. Although he had already become a monk himself, he still had 2 children of his own. He often couldn't put them out of his mind, so he would frequently go to visit his children at home. Over time, as he continued this routine, it seems that by the 7th visit, for reasons that remain unknown, or perhaps due to a particular karmic condition, he gradually attained the fruition of sainthood. At that time, they themselves also thought this way, at that particular moment. The Buddha thought so as well. The shackles of this world, the heavy iron chains of this world, these are not particularly strong or unbreakable, because for a certain period of time, they can bind and restrain you tightly, but they cannot do so forever. Nor can they bind you life after life, keeping you trapped in samsara without ever letting go. They do not have that power. So generally speaking, in Buddhism, perhaps including what we see, all kinds of instruments of punishment in prisons, these things for a true Buddhist, none of them are really that frightening. Especially during certain special periods in the past, many eminent monks and great masters at that time in the world had already endured the worst possible tortures, extremely severe ones, but they may have truly understood as well that within samsara there are even more terrifying forms of bondage. So they are not controlled by these restraints, and even in prison, they still live within their own sphere, enjoying a life of freedom and ease. So these principles should be understood from a wide variety of different teachings and are made clear in all of them. Next.
Dopi changma ganyin testu jang, tesu jang, rap de churver gajin pakbe song. Tan nam dot de la martaver, tetak tamnim nirte churver shit.
Though the chains of attachment may be loose, the words of the sages are extremely hard to unravel. Those who are steadfast do not cling to attachment. By analyzing attachment, they swiftly attain liberation. Sometimes, during oral exams, it's the same when I speak Chinese. Some people below are always holding back their laughter. During the oral exam, it's absolutely fine. If you want to laugh, just go ahead and laugh. We're actually quite open-minded. No matter if it's during the oral exam, if I say something incorrect or mistaken, you can point it out too. But some of the teachings here are still quite interesting. The chains of attachment in the world, the shackles of love, may perhaps indeed seem rather loose on the surface, not so intimidating. For example, whether it's loving the opposite sex or loving material possessions, these things often seem as if we can't even notice them ourselves. But in fact, they are truly frightening things. However, the sages say, this is something extremely hard to untangle. Everything else can be pulled out. For example, if an arrow is shot and enters your body, it can be pulled out, and you just need to apply some medicine. But if your heart is truly pierced and deeply attached to someone else, then, even with the best medicine, there's really nothing you can do about it. Even education can't help, and using other methods, it's also not easy to untie. So what about those who are truly steadfast? Steadfast ones, usually we often refer to them as Danba, steadfast ones. The steadfast ones are also mentioned in the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras, and in many places they are said to be another name for bodhisattvas, or another name for certain sages. So as a steadfast one, They are not easily swayed by these strong attachments of love and affection in their hearts. They are not deeply bound or restricted by these things either. Therefore, when they analyze things in detail, the chains of attachment can be untied and liberated in a very short time. At this point, the commentary also says that we need our own observation, practice, and the Buddha's teachings. If one possesses these three, then such a steadfast person needs these three things. They already have these three tools. On one hand, they will observe for themselves, because when one truly observes, just as we discussed earlier, attachment is indeed a deluded conceptual thought. If we rely on the Buddha's teachings as well, as we mentioned before, in the wisdom sword of demon subduing, it analyzes greed in detail extremely thoroughly and comprehensively. Many people, after studying it, have said that they have gained a great deal, and also by relying on one's own wisdom. A person with wisdom will truly analyze it. Moreover, after analyzing it deeply and thoroughly, even though it may not be completely eradicated, at the very least, it will be somewhat relaxed, or at least eased. This is like what was said before about someone who was locked up in prison or something similar. At first, this person might have been tightly shackled in iron chains, bound very severely like that. But later on, when a Dharma teacher gave a teaching, and while he was listening to the teaching, he heard that the most severe and difficult forms of bondage in this world are illness, aging, and death. The binding of illness, aging, and death is extremely serious. After he received this significant teaching, he began to feel truly liberated. After being released, his family said, "Now that you're out, that's great." He replied, "Actually, I haven't truly been released yet. There is an even more serious kind of bondage restraining me." Then his family said, "You've already been released from prison now. What else could still be restraining you?" He said, "In my mind, illness, aging, and death are still binding me. This is even more frightening than being locked up in prison." Then they said, "That's nothing. Everyone has to deal with that. There must be something wrong with you." Then he argued with them, saying, "You are the ones with a problem. You yourselves, clearly, are tightly bound by all these afflictions. You don't even understand this much. You are truly pitiful." Later, he insisted on becoming a monk, expressing his determination to follow a monastic path. After he was ordained, it seems that about 7 days had passed since his ordination. He began to recite this verse. Actually, this verse mainly addresses the form aggregate in particular, and is a verse for letting go of attachment and craving toward all phenomena. The meaning is that to us it may seem like being locked up in prison in this world, or like those unfortunate beings who are trapped in cages. Their bodies have no freedom, and it's truly pitiful to witness. But in reality, if some sages or truly wise beings were to look at us, it might seem like we're outside, living freely and carelessly, as if nothing is wrong. But in fact, our minds are tightly bound by greed and by all kinds of afflictions. It's even more pitiful and miserable than being locked in prison. This truth is perhaps only explained in the Buddhist scriptures. That's indeed the case. The great masters of the past, if they were locked in prison, they would be very relaxed without any suffering in their hearts. But we, living out here in the world, those of us who often seem to roam freely, are actually tightly bound by these afflictions in our minds. So we have no freedom, neither in body nor mind. We can't rest well during the day, and we can't sleep at night, especially for those who are deeply obsessed with so-called love and control. They may gradually become unhealthy in appearance, and their overall condition continues to worsen. A person's state is very important. Recently, I've noticed that our audience's state is actually quite good. At first I thought, I haven't spoken to this kind of audience for a long time over here, so if everyone in the audience ended up falling asleep, I was wondering what I should do then. It wouldn't be good to fall asleep myself, but staying awake wouldn't feel right either. But it seems that, on one hand, you all are listening quite attentively, and on the other hand, there's the blessing from our oral teachings. So no one can really fall asleep. When it's your turn later, you probably won't be able to either. So everyone is doing all right, I suppose. The Sutra of Mindfulness of the True Dharma also says, if there are shackles and another kind called manacles, If they bind you, the sages say that these are actually not the strongest restraints. But if someone is attached in their heart, then that is the strongest shackle of all. So in our world, maybe we don't know, in this very life of ours, whether we might end up being locked up or have our hands tied. Is there such a possibility? But if someone is truly a great virtuous one, or a person whose mind is truly merged with the Dharma, then perhaps this isn't really something so frightening. What's even more frightening is being controlled by attachment and clinging within one's own mind stream. As for this, some are likened to iron chains, some to wooden locks. Some are like the ropes we just mentioned earlier. If someone is bound in this way, then that person is truly pitiable. Therefore, as a practitioner, at the very beginning, it's best to cut off all these entanglements completely. At the start, don't even let such tendencies arise, because once they do, it becomes extremely difficult in most cases to extricate yourself from them. So, as a wise and thoughtful person, one should first take the time to truly understand that in our real and everyday lives, the so-called love or happiness that people so often praise and talk about behind it all, honestly, it's not really quite like those eulogies make it out to be. It should be just as we discussed yesterday. In fact, when people start to praise something more and more, what lies behind it is not necessarily so pure. If people keep saying something is unreasonable, perhaps there is actually something important worth taking from it behind the scenes.
Jiktin na tsokang den dotman yer, yewa gun tokang yin dopa yin. Jiktin na tsok tevzim ne jang, ne jang na gun jang tan nam dalan dan bandar, dalan dan bandar.
All things in the world, what is not desire is delusion, and what is delusion is desire. All things exist in this way. Those who are steadfast regulate their desires. Here, what this means is, all things and events in the world, the material world, the sentient world, all these myriad things in their various and diverse forms, including sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches, all of these various different external phenomena. In fact, these are not actually desires or attachments themselves in any way, because all things in the world, based on their own causes and conditions, they appear before us, just like a double moon seen when pressing one's eyes, a mere illusion. They do not have any real substance. But what is truly the most frightening? It is deluded desire, deluded thoughts. As we discussed earlier, this kind of grasping, deluded thought, this is attachment and desire. For example, no matter how many people there are in front of us in this world, if your mind does not become attached to them, then they are not harmful to you. But if your mind simply clings to the objects before you, then that becomes somewhat frightening. So all things in the world are not inherently frightening. What is it really like then? It's like the cave inside a lion's den. The cave itself is not the lion. It's not truly frightening. The true nature of all things in the world, as described in conventional terms, still exists. But what is the most frightening? As soon as external objects appear before us, my improper attention and my habitual afflictions begin to increase, and I start to discriminate and cling to them, attaching myself to these things. In this way, this is called attachment and craving. This is truly frightening. All things continue to abide in this way. As for all things, whether you choose to practice or not, they all continue to exist exactly as they are. However, if your mind does not cling to them, then there is truly no problem at all. Therefore, the steadfast one tames the desirous mind. As for those who are truly steadfast in renouncing attachment, the wise ones, they do not try to eliminate every single thing in the world, because that's impossible. Of course, this refers to those with a higher level of realization, such as bodhisattvas or individuals who have realized emptiness, for example. Just as it is stated in the Bodhikariyavatara, for such a person, there is absolutely no harm from external circumstances at all. No matter where they are, nowadays, even some practitioners, especially those who are new and interested in and fond of meditation, are always particularly selective and very careful about their environment. Sometimes we often tend to think, oh, this person must be very good, because they have been in retreat for 5 or 10 years in some place. But after they come out, it seems like they really don't dare to interact with anyone at all. If they stay in a slightly noisy place, They feel uncomfortable inside as well. We truly hope that many people from all walks of life, no matter what, will still be able to go along with sentient beings in the future, which is good. For example, when we go out, if two people share a room, they can also be quite relaxed. Nowadays, many people in the world are very relaxed, but they are also very picky about food. And when it comes to taking a car, they are also very selfish. They insist on sitting in a better spot themselves. And at night, when it comes to sleeping, if there's even a little bit of noise, they're unhappy. Actually, a truly strong person is not greatly affected by the outside world. Moreover, they can adapt to any situation. I also sincerely hope that many of us who are gathered here today in the future, whether you are in the institute or in your own class, no matter what happens, everyone's mind should be very relaxed. Don't always selfishly protect your own interests, saying things like, "Oh, I can't use this, that won't do." For example, if someone is chosen as a little manager, they feel especially miserable. If they don't get a prize just once, they feel especially miserable again. Even the smallest, tiniest circumstance makes them feel uneasy inside. But a strong person, a bodhisattva with better practice, uses another way to gently tame their own mind. They also carefully tame their mind through observation. They work to destroy their own desires and afflictions, and then, through practice, actually those who are truly wise and genuinely practice in this world of ours can be anywhere, in any situation. Even in distraction in the city, anywhere is fine. But before one's own mind has matured, it is indeed important to rely on some good teachers and spiritual friends, and try not to go to places full of distractions. Otherwise, the mind of an ordinary person, in a very short time, will be influenced by other people and by the surrounding environment. In the past, in a certain city, there were a few male lay practitioners. While they were chatting together with each other, they began to discuss exactly what is meant by desire and attachment. At that moment, some have mentioned that attachment is to one's own wife, while others have said that it is to one's own children, and some said it is the external forms that the eyes perceive, and so on. They kept discussing and debating in all sorts of different ways like this, but in the end, after careful consideration, they realized that, in fact, none of these are truly the real source of desire. The real source of desire is one's own mind. It was for this reason that the Buddha also taught this important point. Actually, all phenomena, of course, do have an influence on us beginners, but if we are truly affected, it depends on whether our mind has cultivated even a little bit of practice, and whether we have a bit of wisdom to observe external phenomena. If we have these two, then no matter where we are, we can still withstand the temptations of the external world, and withstand the harm caused by external circumstances. So just as I mentioned earlier, some people think this is attachment, and some people may be attached to what they personally like, whether it's their own wife or husband, or material wealth or social status. Everyone has some form of attachment, but the key to these attachments lies in your own mind. If your mind is not actually controlled by these external circumstances, then no matter where you are in any environment, it will all be fine. Therefore, a truly steadfast person will not be easily influenced by external material things. One should strive to firmly and consistently subdue one's own mind.
Marnam lanar tagpo ndotpa med ndotchin kang la chagate martagpe yangchid me shir semji rapon la chir ne man gerwa shuji song.
People have no constant desires. All that we crave is impermanent. If one abandons desire, one will not be reborn and will no longer fall into the realm of death. As for these things in the human world, this is another way of putting it. This craving, in fact, has no real or tangible substance. So for the person who gives rise to attachment, in fact, their attachment will not last forever. Whether it's from the perspective of the object of attachment or from the perspective of one's mindset, in reality, people cannot always be attached. Some people, in particular, become obsessed with a certain object of attachment, but after a while, that attachment completely disappears. So when people are attached, because of impermanence, it's impossible to remain attached forever. And if we observe the objects of our attachment, they too are impermanent, changing moment by moment. Nor do they exist permanently. If my attachment itself is also momentary, and there is no moment of lasting permanence, and the object of my attachment is, in truth, not truly worth clinging to, then that is letting go of desire. And in that case, one will not be reborn in samsara. If one is not reborn in samsara, we will not fall into the realm of death. The realm of death refers to the cycle of birth and death, with endless births and deaths, arising and ceasing. And again there are future lives. This is how it is. At that time, there were also people wandering about everywhere, who specifically asked the Buddha, what exactly is the concept of attachment? And what exactly is form? They asked such questions. At that time, the Buddha was in Rajagriha, and he taught that, in reality, all phenomena lack both a subject who clings and an object to be clung to, especially things like form and so on. They absolutely do not truly exist in reality. Then he spoke this verse. So here, on the surface, it may seem to us as if I am the one who craves and that is the object of my craving. But when we truly and carefully examine things with wisdom and insight, our own self is impermanent, yet we crave after other impermanent beings. Isn't it just like what is said in the Bodhicariyavatara, as they say? Our own selves are inherently impermanent, yet we still continue to long for impermanent objects. Even after hundreds or thousands of lifetimes, we never see the ones we love, no matter what happens. You will never truly encounter the objects of your love and craving. So if we observe perhaps from the perspective of ultimate truth, we definitely won't find anything at all. How could there be someone to love or someone who can love? But in the conventional world, when we simply use an ordinary, simple moment-to-moment method of observation, which is not Madhyamaka ultimate analysis, if we observe impermanence moment-to-moment, the craver and the object do not exist. Due to conceptual thoughts of sentient beings, they may not understand this point. If we truly understand that neither the one who craves nor the object of craving actually exists, then we will no longer continue to wander in samsara in the future, and we also won't keep suffering all the time. It's just like attaining the state of an arhat. That's all for today.
Udāna Sūtra L8